Hello, today's lesson has a heading that says 5.6 solving percent problems. But before we can actually get into solving percent problems, I need to make sure that you know how to convert from percentages, right? Percentages, fractions, and decimals. And then maybe you're also going to go from percentages to decimals to fractions or fractions to percent. So you need to know how to go back and forth between these three representations. You can create a fraction, a decimal, and a percent that are all equivalent to each other, and it will help you solve percent problems if you get really good at going back and forth between these different representations. So for example, here's a picture, right? Did you know that you can represent the same quantity by using a fraction, percent, or decimal? So the glass is, let's say the glass is half full, right? Not half empty. So if I have a half a glass, it's the same as saying I have 50% of my glass full, or by saying I have the decimal 0.5 is what is left in my glass, right? Half empty, half full. Okay, so now you've learned this before. We've practiced taking a percent and turning it into a fraction by knowing that percent is a ratio over 100. And then we learn how to take a fraction and turn it into a percent. We have to make an equivalent fraction over 100. Notice 8/5 wasn't over 100 until we multiplied it by this giant 1, and then we made an equivalent fraction over 100. So 8/5 is equal to 160 over 100, which now is a percent because a percent is the fraction that's over 100. All right, so we've been practicing that a lot. Now what we're getting into is, here's a red star. I'm going to ask you to write this down. And so the decimal, notice the bottom part is the easiest part. So when you have a decimal and you turn it into percent, all you need to do is multiply by 100. When you have a percent and you turn it into a decimal, you're dividing by 100. Well, remember that percent literally means, right? This is per 100, which is why we are dividing by 100. And then if you go from a percent to a fraction, right, these are the ones we practice. You put the percentage over a denominator of 100 and simplify. And then to go from a fraction to a percent, this is what I just showed you, right? So this part over here is what you have practiced a lot. We haven't practiced decimals to percents and fraction. Well, we've done some fraction to decimal, but we haven't done decimals to fraction. So really, this decimal part of the triangle, this is where we're going to do a lot of our practice today. So go ahead and pause the video and write down all of the arrows. You're going to use this kind of as a graphic organizer to help you when you forget the math concept. You can just go back to this graphic organizer, make sure you have your arrows and your instructions pointing the right way, and then go ahead and unpause the video when you're done writing this down. Okay, so here's an example of a fraction to a decimal. Just remember that the fraction bar really means division. So you're going to be dividing. And of course you divide the numerator by the denominator. So remember the denominator goes on the outside. And then if you need to annex zeros and divide, that's fine. You keep dividing until you have no remainder or the decimal repeats. That's a fraction to a decimal. Now when we take a decimal to a fraction, there's more than one way to do this, but I'm showing you a way that I think you can use every time without having to think too hard about place value. I love when students know place value, but if you don't, here's a process where you write the decimal over 1. You multiply the numerator and denominator by a power of 10 so that you get rid of the decimal. It's not that much different from the ratio tables that we've been doing where we create equivalent ratios. And then of course you simplify the new fraction. Anytime you're converting something to a fraction, you simplify. And now I'll also give you the idea of place value, right? So if you take a fraction like 0.25, this, remember the correct way that we're supposed to say decimals? This is really 25 hundredths, right? Because these are the tenths, and this place value is the hundredths. And the way I say this decimal is the way I write the fraction. I say this decimal, I pretend the decimal isn't there. I have 25, and then I say the place value, 25 hundredths. 25 hundredths sounds very much like this, which is what we got when we multiplied by 100. So you can convert decimals to fractions if you know your place value, and if you don't, then you can use a ratio table. Okay, so now let's practice an example of what I'm talking about. So here's some batting averages, right? And there's Eva and Michelle, and Eva gets 42 hits out of 90 at-bats, and Michelle gets 38 hits out of 80 at-bats. And remember, when we're finding batting averages, we're dividing. And so if I divide the 42 by 90, now I'm going to use my calculator, but it's okay for you to use a calculator, but I always want you to set this up, or you could set up this, right? And then I'm going to tell you now, you don't have to show me the long division. You can just write your answer here, because I'm trusting now that you're using a calculator, but it's great if you can show me that you know how to set up the numbers. So notice that I'm showing you the 90s on the outside, the 42s on the inside, and then what I got when I actually did the division was, let's see, 90 goes into 42, 0.46 with a repeating decimal. So if I ask you to show me work, you can show me this, but you don't have to do the long division because you're using a calculator. And now let's look at Michelle's. It's 38 divided by 80, so 80 is on the outside, and I get 0.475. So the way I answer this question is to figure out which decimal is bigger, right? So I can also annex a 0 on this number here, right? If I add a 0, it's easier to compare because now there's 3 decimal places. The tenths are the same, but when I get to the hundreds, this number is greater, right? So now I've got the information that I need to type in my answer, and I would say Michelle's batting average is greater because 0.475 is greater than, I'm just going to type the greater than symbol, 0.46 repeating. Okay. That was taking a fraction and turning it into a decimal because I know that this fraction bar means divide. Now I'm going to go the opposite way, right? And I'm going to turn a decimal into a fraction. So again, if you remember place value, you could just go to this, 0.45. Those are the tenths, those are the hundreds. I literally can write 45 100ths and then simplify. But if I don't remember that, I'm going to do this process where I think about, it's a little bit like my ratio tables. I've got 0.45. I'm going to put 1 down here. I'm going to multiply by a power that gets rid of the decimal. Because I have 2 digits after the decimal, I need to multiply by 100. When I do that, I get 45, and 1 times 100 is 100. And now I'm going to divide by 5 because I know this one number ends in 5 and one number ends in 0. 45 divided by 5 is 9, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So the fraction that's represented is 9/20 of a mile. So 0.45 miles is the same as 9/20 of a mile. So I used a ratio table. Okay, so now I have some OYOs for you to try. We're going to be taking fractions and converting them to decimals, and then take the decimals and convert them to fractions. Go ahead and pause the video, try these on your own, and I will show you the answers. So remember, this fraction bar means divide. So I'm dividing 2 by 5. 5 goes on the outside, 2 goes on the inside. I add a decimal and I annex a couple of zeros just in case I need them. I don't have to. 5 goes into 2 0 times. Now I'm looking at the 2 and the 0. Oops, don't forget to put your decimal up on the quotient. 5 goes into 24 times. When I multiply, oops, let me do the dead monkeys smell bad. There's my process, right? I'm dividing, I'm multiplying, I'm subtracting, and bringing down. So when I do the division, it was 5 goes into 24 times. When I multiply 5 times 4, I get 20. And then I subtract, oh, I don't have anything to bring down. I didn't need that extra 0. My decimal number is 0.4. So 2/5 is the same as 0.4. And now I'm going to divide 8 into 7. My habit is just to put the decimal on top and annex a couple of zeros because I'm not sure how many times I'm going to need to divide. So when I divide 8 into 7, it goes 0 times, but 8 does go into 70. 8 times 8 is 64. When I subtract, I get 6. Oops, sorry, I'm going to show you the regrouping. I get 6 and I bring down the 0. 8 times 7 is 56. I subtract and I get 4, which means I still have to annex another 0, bring down this 0, and now I know that 8 times 5 is 40. Phew, I'm done. Okay, so it was 0.875. All right, that's turning fractions into decimals. Really, please just remember, I'm just asking you to divide. All right. When I'm converting decimals to fractions, I am going to use the ratio table because we've been using so many ratio tables. It's just easy for me to think about. So if I put 0.45 over 1, then I want to get rid of my decimals. So I need to multiply by a power of 2 zeros, right, of 100. And when I multiply the 1 times 100, I get 100 here. And the decimal moves over 2 places, right? Power of 100 moves the decimal twice. And now I'm going to, oh, wait, this one looks so familiar. Guess we've already done this one before. 45 divided by 5 is 9. And 100 divided by 5 is 20. All right, if you didn't copy that down as an example, now you have it in your OYO. Okay, 1.26. I'm going to put the 1.26 here and put that over 1. So I have to multiply 1.26 again times 100 times 100. It's not always times the 100. You have to look at the number of digits after the decimal because you want to move it over until you have a whole number. So I get 126 over 100. Ooh, and now I'm going to divide by 2 because they're both even. So they share a common factor of 2. 100 divided by 2 is 50, and 126 divided by 2 is 63. Okay, now I have a little bit of a problem. The ratio table is great, but I now have an improper fraction. And remember, now I'm going to divide the improper fraction. So now I have 50 divided into 63. It goes 1 time. And when I subtract, I have 13 left over. That means it's 13 50ths, right? So my answer is 1 and 13 50ths. That is the fraction that is equivalent to 1.26. All right, next. So now we're going to be looking at how to turn a percent into a decimal and a decimal into a percent. You remember that percent literally means per 100. So guess what? You take the percent and you divide by 100 to turn it into a decimal. And remember, a power of 10, every time you divide by 100, the value is getting smaller by 2 decimal places. So if you take 28%, I take the 28. This is where my decimal would be. I move it over 1, 2, boom. Now, what I don't like about this picture is it needs to have the leading 0. So if you have a decimal number that's less than 1, it's always a good idea to put in the leading 0. So it's much better if you write 0.28. Okay, now we're going to go from a decimal to a percent. And, ooh, it's just the opposite. Instead of dividing by 100, I'm multiplying by 100. So this time the value gets bigger by 2 decimal places. So notice if I have 0.25, I move the decimal over once, twice, boom, I write the percent symbol next to it. Now you could have thought about it like this. 0.25, you guys know that's the same as 25 over 100, ding, 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 which of course 25 over 100 is 25%. But I'm showing you now, you don't have to go from the decimal to the fraction. You can go right from a decimal to a percent by multiplying by 100. Okay, so let's try the last, I have 2 examples and then OYOs. So when you buy anything at the store, except for your groceries and things that you're going to actually make, food that you cook on your own, when you buy produce and you buy meat, there is no tax on that. But there is tax on things like when you buy clothes at the store. And the sales tax is found by multiplying the price of what you're buying times this as a decimal. So think about it as a percent. So the more money you spend on an item, the more tax you will pay. So I'm going to start off with 7.75. And I know if I'm turning a percent into a percent into a decimal, I can start by writing the number without the percent sign, and then I go, oh, percent means divide by 100, so I'm going to move the decimal over 1, 2, because 100 has 2 zeros. I put in my 0 there, and I add my leading 0 there. This seems like a very long decimal to multiply by, but remember, you will be using a calculator. So there's that one. The last example is if you have a decimal score and your teacher tells you you got 0.95 on a test and you want to know what the percent is, all you need to do is take your decimal and multiply by 100. So the decimal is moving over 2 places, 1, 2, boom, it's 95%. Those are my examples. Now you're going to try the OYO. All right, so go ahead and pause this, and then I will show you the answer so that you can check your work. Right, you want to try this, kind of treat it like a mini quiz. Don't just watch the video and write down the answers. I really want you to try it on your own. Okay, so I'm going to write the 12 here. There's the decimal. It's really, it's 12 divided by 100. So my decimal is here. And when I divide, I went right to the answer without showing you the movement of the decimal. So I'll do that in red. The decimal starts right here. And when I divide by 100, the decimal moves over 2 places. I put a 0 there. 12% is the same as 0.12 as a decimal. Now we'll do the 4.5%. I just go ahead and write the 4.5. And then I'm going to divide it by 100. So my decimal has to move over 2 places. Boom, boom. If I don't have a 0, I go ahead and add 1, and then I add the leading 0, 0.045. Okay, 129% as a decimal. 129. And then I'm going to divide by 100. So I know the decimal has to move over 2 places. It's here. I move over once, twice, that's where it lands, 1.29. And then the last problems are where you take a decimal and turn it into a percent. And remember, we're multiplying by 100. So if I take this number and multiply by 100, the decimal has to move over 2 places, boom, boom. My percent is 36%. And then I have 1.48 times 100. Every time I multiply by 100, there are 2 zeros and the decimal moves over twice. There it is, 148%. And now I've got, this looks like it could be a tax, right? So I've got 0.075 times 100. That means I have to move the decimal twice to turn it into a percent, and I get 7.5%. Okay, that's the lesson. Bye-bye.